clear? Thank you very much for joining.
Okay, thank you.
We're connected and we're now actually broadcasting. So I'd like to formally welcome everyone to this morning's and in Australia's this evening's events of the British All-Party Parliamentary Group on North Korea, particularly to launch the report into our inquiry into human rights violations in North Korea between 2014 and up to date to 2020-21. My name is David Burrows. I privilege on behalf of the co-chairs, Fiona Bruce MP and Lord Orton, to lead the inquiry with the lead researcher, Dr. Evelina Ochab. And thank you very much for Christian Solidarity Worldwide, also for their support in the Secretariat for this very important report. It gives me great pleasure to welcome everyone to today's event, and you'll have the opportunity to participate. Everyone will now be all too familiar, sadly, with the times we're in to webinars, but it has a real opportunity to bring an international dimension to these types of events. And so wherever you're from, you're very welcome to participate using the chat functions to raise your questions to our eminent panelists who I'll shortly introduce. And you'll also have the opportunity to speak as well live in your questions, which will bring you into the webinar when we get to that. But first and foremost, I'd like to really welcome our panelists. I'll go through them when I get to them to introduce them more in more detail. But we have Fiona Bruce, a Member of Parliament, and Lord Orton, the co-chairs of the All-Party Parliamentary Group. We have, and particularly want to welcome very much the Honourable Michael Kirby, who's joined us from Australia. It is particularly special to welcome you to today's event, not least because it's your extraordinary work chairing the Commission of Inquiry for the UN was obviously the basis and is the basis, is the rationale for us to seek to breathe new light and energy, life and energy into that report. So thank you so much for joining us today. And to Dr. Evelina Ochab, very welcome, I'll introduce shortly, and to Ewan Park, particularly as you can, because we always want to, certainly with the All-Party Parliamentary Group, to give voices for escapees from North Korea. And so it'd be wonderful. We look forward to hearing from you later. But firstly, if I just may turn to Fiona Bruce to kick off proceedings. So Fiona Bruce, who's, as I said before, is co-chair of this All-Party Parliamentary Group and is the Member of Parliament for Congleton and the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief. And together with Lord Orton have certainly been the foremost parliamentary voices on international human rights, not least in relation to the human rights violations concerning deeply our case. So it's very right and good to hear from Fiona now. Fiona.
Thank you very much, David, and welcome everyone to this event. The All-Party Parliamentary Group in the UK Parliament on North Korea exists to highlight human rights abuses in North Korea and to help formulate solutions that promote and support human rights there. And it was our privilege in 2013-14 to host a hearing of the UN Commission of Inquiry, chaired by the Honourable Justice Michael Kirby, when his hearings led up to his report on human rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in that year. That report published a very clear case that as it stood, the gravity, scale and nature of the violations in terms of human rights abuses revealed a state that does not have any parallel in the contemporary world. The report included a litany of concerns about human rights violations and a number of recommendations to address the gravity, scale and nature of those atrocities. However, 7 years later, the majority of those recommendations have not been implemented and atrocities continue unabated. And as a result of that, and critically because the All-Party Parliamentary Group, knowing the value of that report, is keen to ensure that it remains a live and active document, wanted to, if you like, update it with a report on the human rights abuses in North Korea from 2014 to 2020. We are particularly grateful to the Honourable Justice Michael Kirby that he has very actively engaged with our report throughout. Indeed, can I also thank, before we proceed, a number of other people, including Dr. Ewelina Ochab, who has provided such excellent legal support to our inquiry, to David Burrows, the lead inquiry chair, and to Colin Crooks, the ambassador to Pyongyang of HMG, Lord Ahmed, the human rights minister in the UK Foreign Office, and indeed Foreign Office officials. We're grateful to them, and we're grateful to everyone who helped provide evidence to our inquiry. So what does our inquiry reveal? Well, the findings of our inquiry indicate that despite the 2014 Commission of Inquiry's report, the situation of human rights in North Korea has not improved. And indeed, the recommendations of that 2014 Commission of Inquiry report to the UN have not been implemented 7 years later, with some minor exceptions. Our inquiry members have reviewed the evidence of North Korean officials being involved in those years since 2014 in killings, torture, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, sexual and gender-based violence, including rape, sex trafficking, forced abortions and infanticide, modern-day slavery, persecution based on religion or belief, and more. So many of these atrocities amount to crimes against humanity. And there are reasons to believe that some of those atrocities may reach the threshold of genocide, in particular in relation to three groups: abuse of Christians, half Chinese children, and what is called the hostile group of North Korean. It's important to emphasize that there is a very limited amount of information on human rights violations coming out from the DPRK. That doesn't mean they're not happening. On the contrary, this information silence is a key part of the abuse, attempting to silence the victims. But despite this challenge, in an oral hearing with our inquiry members, the UN Special Rapporteur on North Korea, Thomas Ojea Quintana, confirmed that based on evidence available today, 3 crimes could be proven in court: those of false imprisonment, the crime of torture, and the crime of slavery. According to the UN Special Rapporteur on North Korea, other crimes may require further evidence to withstand court scrutiny. However, they should not be disregarded in any inquiries of human rights violations in North Korea, and nor has the APPG done so. So I'd now like to focus on a number of the specific findings of the inquiry and mention some recommendations. And indeed, I have 6 sections that I'd like to focus on. Firstly, killings and murder. The exact number of persons killed are unknown. Killings in North Korea take various forms. They include deliberate starvation, malnutrition, and overwork. This results in the deaths of countless prisoners. Public execution by firing squads or other means are reported and common, especially for prisoners caught attempting to escape. One submission to us of the NKDB Unified Human Rights Database suggests that between 2000 and 2020, there were 1,479 cases of public executions. It further recorded 443 cases of secret executions between 2000 and 2020. But this may be only the tip of an iceberg. The existence of mass graves is well documented, which suggests that numbers will not be ascertained until bodies are exhumed from mass graves. However, as we know from the case of Rwanda, this is a process which could take years. Secondly, torture, inhuman or degrading punishment and treatment. This continues to be widely used on prisoners, but also the wider population. As the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea testified before our inquiry, such acts are perpetrated not only in gulags, that is, the political penal labour colonies or political prison camps, but also in forced labour re-education camps, short-term detention facilities, interrogation detention facilities, and mobile labour brigades or labour detention centres. Methods of torture include beatings, stress positions, starvation, and sleep deprivation. Thirdly, sexual and gender-based violence. As a woman, I found the reports of this particularly distressing. They are common occurrences. Rape and sexual abuse are commonly used on female detainees, according to the reports we received. Among others, a 2017 IBA report cited evidence of a prisoner raped by a security officer, after which the officer stuck a wooden stick inside her vagina and beat her lower body, resulting in her death within a week of the rape. We also heard of the rape of teenage girls and their subsequent attempts to commit suicide by jumping in the Daejeon River. This was so common that prison guards were deployed to the river to thwart them. Human Rights Watch reported on detainees experiencing sexual violence, including rape in detention and interrogation facilities. Interviewees said that agents from the police, secret police, and the prosecutor's office, most in charge of their interrogation, touched their faces and their bodies, including their breasts and hips, either through their clothes or by putting their hands inside their clothes. They said they were powerless to resist because their fate was in the hands of these men. The dire situation of North Korean citizens abused by traffickers who prey on the misery of those wishing to escape was also documented to us. Countless North Korean women are sold to traffickers. Many are trafficked to China, where they are sold into sexual slavery and exploitative labour. Victims do not usually seek protection, fearing they will be arrested. If they are returned to North Korea, that is their likely fate, or worse. The Committee for Human Rights in North Korea testified before the inquiry that women who were pregnant with half Chinese children would be forced to have an abortion, abused and sterilised, and the methods described of those abortions were particularly brutal. I recall one piece of evidence where a heavily pregnant woman was forced to have an abortion as 3 men jumped on her tummy. 4, modern-day slavery. Modern-day slavery is a signature crime of the North Korean regime, according to the evidence we received, whether perpetrated within or outside the country. In November 2020, the Guardian reported factories in China where hundreds of North Korean women have been secretly working in conditions of modern slavery. That report suggested that sources indicate that the North Korean workers in PPE factories in Dandong have about 70% of their wages seized by the North Korean state. Much more should be done by the international community to challenge the perpetrators who benefit from this modern-day slavery. Fifthly, persecution based on religion or belief. This is particularly visible in the case of Christians, though collecting evidence is, of course, challenging. Open Doors state that North Korea is the most dangerous place to live as a Christian. And the case of targeting Christians may, as I've mentioned, amount to the definition of genocide. This issue was briefly considered by the UN Commission of Inquiry in 2014 and also by experts from Hogan Lovells. According to some evidence to our inquiry, multiple witnesses testified to watching prisoners in the political prison camps being tortured and murdered for their religious affiliation. Witnesses testified to seeing Christians or those suspected of being Christians incarcerated in specific zones at which prisoners were subjected to more severe deprivation. Another testified that he witnessed 5 people accused of reading the Bible being sent to the total control zone or executed. Other cases of potential genocidal atrocities are the targeting of half Chinese children, as I've mentioned, with forced abortions, and the so-called hostile group of Korean residents, North Korean residents. This is a very brief summary of the evidence considered by the APPG. In response to the dire situation in North Korea, and as I say, we are grateful for the UK government's Foreign Office's engagement with our APPG, both more widely and in this report, we are calling on the UK government to take steps to more actively engage in the situation of human rights in the country, to address these atrocities, to provide greater humanitarian assistance, to work even more actively to justice and accountability. Certain steps, especially those towards justice and accountability, such as a UN Security Council resolution referring the situation in North Korea to the ICC, continue to be neglected by the international community due to concerns that there would not be enough international support. And whilst the All-Party Parliamentary Group recognises these challenges and those faced at the UN Security Council, other important steps could be considered. For example, strengthening the accountability unit into a mechanism equipped to collect and preserve evidence for future prosecutions, including prosecutions by domestic courts using universal jurisdiction to prosecute the perpetrators. In closing, we need to explore together, that is all of us concerned about this situation, all available options to ensure that the state without parallel continues to, that the state without parallel does not continue these human rights violations unabated. The All-Party Group on North Korea is committed to playing its constructive part, and we hope that this report will provide a valuable contribution.
Thank you very much, Fiona, for that very considered introduction. And now, very much welcome David Alton, Lord Alton of Liverpool, crossbench life peer, the loudest of voices for the voiceless, not least in North Korea. As we know, founder and co-chair of this all-party parliamentary group, has visited Pyongyang on 4 occasions, protesting about human rights, raising cases with ministers there, detailing those experiences in one of his books, Building Bridges is the Hope for North Korea. And indeed, in March 2017, spoke at the forum of the 34th session of the UN HRC, alongside Judge Michael Kirby and Dr. Sir Usman, the former UN Special Rapporteur on North Korea, calling for the regime's leaders to be prosecuted by the ICC, a call which continues today. Lord Alton.
David, thank you and good morning. And I don't want to reiterate everything that Fiona has just said so eloquently and powerfully. She has talked about the importance of this report and its recommendations, and I'm delighted that the foreword has been written by His Honour Michael Kirby. Michael, it's good to see you on the call today. You've done so much, and we wanted to support everything that you have done through the Commission of Inquiry and your work in gathering such important information to ensure, as Fiona has said, that we don't just allow this report to die or to disappear or to gather dust, but as Fiona said, it should be a live and active document. And one way we felt we could help to make that be the case is to review its contents and see if we could shine a light again on what is happening in North Korea. It took me back, when I was asked if I would contribute this morning to the discussion, to the foundation of this all-party parliamentary group. It was because an escapee came here to Westminster and told me the story of the appalling things that had happened to him and his family. His wife and children had died in the famine. He'd gone in and out trying to rescue other escapees and getting them across the River Tumen and the Yalu out to some kind of freedom. And in the end, although I didn't feel that I had any very much power or influence, nevertheless, I said that the minimum we could do would be to raise this here in Parliament, and I would try and secure a debate, which I did. And arising out of that came not only a visit to North Korea, but also the formation of this all-party parliamentary group. And in its terms of reference, its mandate, we said it was being formed to promote human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, and to find solutions. And I hope that we've been true to the things that we said we would do. I just dug out this morning, this report from 15 years ago. The headline is, "Now the world must wake up to the horror of Korea's gulags." We've taken evidence here in Parliament, in the Moses Room, under the great pictures that hang there of the Ten Commandments, but the judgment of Daniel as well, and heard these harrowing and vivid accounts. And the sadness for me, I suppose, about everything that Fiona has said to us today is that whether it was under Kim Il-sung, whether it was under Kim Jong-il, or now under Kim Jong-un, under these three successive Kims, the same situation has applied to the beleaguered people of North Korea. Let's read a little bit of what witnesses said to us during the hearing 15 years ago, and nothing has changed. One young man who was 25, who'd escaped as a child, described how he witnessed fellow child prisoners being killed through accidents and beatings. He told us that children and parents were required to watch and to report on one another. His parents had been sent to the camp as political prisoners. He ended up having to watch as his mother and brother were publicly executed. Another one of the witnesses who gave evidence was 37 years old. He had worked as a prison guard at 4 political prison camps within the so-called absolute control zone. He described how his father killed himself when he realized that he'd been heard criticizing the regime. His mother and brothers were sent to prison camps, and he was re-educated and became a prison guard in the absolute control zones. And he vividly and harrowingly described how he witnessed guard dogs imported from Russia tear 3 children to pieces, and how the camp warden congratulated the guard who trained the dogs. It's pretty disturbing stuff. I concluded the piece I wrote about it at the time by reflecting that Mikhail Gorbachev was the grandson of a Gulag survivor, and he finally consigned the Gulags to history. But they haven't been consigned yet in North Korea to history, and indeed there are estimates that still hundreds of thousands of people are sent to them. Only yesterday, with others, I sent this letter to our Foreign Secretary. This was about 50 North Korean escapees who had been sent by the Chinese authorities on the 14th of July back to North Korea. And we said in this letter, knowing all that we do, not just from those reports and witness statements and testimonies that we'd heard in the past, but everything we know from your report, Michael, we said in this letter, these North Koreans without doubt end up in prison and labor camps where they will very likely die, either by execution or as a result of the dire conditions and mistreatment. And we went on to make the point that there are several hundred more North Korean escapees detained in Shenyang, Tumen, and other detention centers, and that over the past 2 decades or more, China's forcibly repatriated hundreds of thousands of North Korean escapees, and most of whom ended up in the gulags and prison cells in desperate conditions. Only a small number of escapees have managed to escape again, including a few hundred North Korean defectors in the US today. We go on to say to Dominic Raab, our Foreign Secretary, why we believe he needs to intervene, why we need to call in the North Korean ambassador here in London and say we want something done about this, and why we should protest as well to Beijing about their constant failure to uphold the conventions that they are signed up to, especially on the treatment of refugees, and the deliberate sending back of people to North Korea knowing that they will face these enormities and horrors is just simply beyond the pale. And I think that too often we have been nervous of upsetting either the North Koreans or the Chinese and not saying enough, which comes back to your report, Michael, in 2015. You say there you weren't able to conclude that there was genocide. You left a question mark hanging over what might be happening to some of the specific groups, such as religious believers. But you did conclude that there are crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity. This is hardly of a low order. And you said that this should be referred to the Security Council and from them to the International Criminal Court. It has never happened because of potential vetoes from either China or Russia, And also, I think, because of the feeble-mindedness of other members of the Security Council who simply say, well, there'll be a veto, so it's better for us to leave it to lie. It is not better to leave it to lie. It would be better for us to insist that this is laid before the Security Council. I would hope that even some of the temporary members of the Security Council, the Republic of Ireland, for instance, this year is the temporary member, I would hope that they might have the courage to take your report and place it before the Security Council and say, well, what is going to be done about this? Because if nothing is done about your report, if it's allowed to go on gathering dust, if it's not to be a live and active document, then it will mean that the people who are being sent back will continue to be executed, tortured, and terrible things done to them, the enslavement that Fiona Bruce mentioned, all those things will go on happening, and it will be because we have failed to act. And it hangs heavily on me that despite all the things that we have said over so many years about shining a light on these terrible situations, on these wicked and dreadful cases that go on and on and on, that the international community has been so squeamish in being able to bring it to a head. Either we believe in the rule of law or we don't. We're not about to begin a bombing campaign. Why should we? That will simply lead to the deaths of innocent people on the Korean Peninsula. There's no solution through warfare on the Korean Peninsula. Last time there was a war there, over 3 million people died. But there is a different approach that can be taken, and that is through our insistence in using international fora wherever we can. We concluded our letter to the Foreign Secretary by quoting Sir Winston Churchill, who said, if we're together, nothing is impossible. And I think that the nations who believe in the rule of law, and there are still a majority of nations in this world who fiercely oppose authoritarian and totalitarian regimes, must show what they are made of. And we must not now sit back and allow this new report from the All-Party Group to sit alongside the Commission of Inquiry report from 2015, to sit alongside reports like the one I read from 15 years ago, saying now the world must wake up to the horrors of Korea's gulags. Well, time is against the people who have just been repatriated. We owe it to them. We have a duty now to make sure that in our parliaments around the world, that parliamentarians are putting pressure on their governments to act. Thank you, David.
Thank you so much, Lord Alton. Thank you. And it now gives me a great pleasure and privilege to introduce Honourable Michael Kirby. Michael Kirby is an international jurist, educator, former judge, I think the longest serving Australian judge at the time. Undertaking many international activities, the United Nations, the Commonwealth Secretariat, the APPG, the Global Fund Against AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, and continue those causes with many great passion and vigour But of most significance to us, of course, was as chair of the United Nations Commission of Inquiry in 2013 and 2014. And for that reason, and alongside the ongoing support for this, we very much welcome.
Thank you very much, David Burrows, for having me in the Mother of Parliament. I'm here in Sydney in a very cold winter and in a very severe lockdown because of the COVID pandemic. And all of us have many things on our minds. The terrible infliction of horrors on lawyers in Belarus is on my mind tonight. And there are lots of things that can occupy our minds, but it is a wonderful and admirable thing that Fiona Bruce and Lord Alton and you, David Burrows, and other participants, including an escapee from North Korea, Ji-Yoon Park. I pay my respects to those who, with courage and determination, walked at great risk to their lives to get out of North Korea, to bring the stories that ultimately have landed on our desks and that we are not turning away from. I was contacted by your secretariat and asked would I be present at this occasion. And when I looked at the outstanding report that was prepared, which really is a magnificent production, given the relatively small resources that are available, but it is a wonderful report. And I would ask that my respects and congratulations should be conveyed to the Secretariat for so succinctly and ably bringing together both a record of past knowledge and the addition of new knowledge, which is still going on of violations of fundamental human rights, crimes against humanity, and possibly more. I was asked also to prepare a foreword to your report, which of course is a very great honour for somebody on the other side of the world to offer a report. There was a time, not so very long ago, when our final Court of Appeal sat in the building at the Palace of Westminster and gave great service in bringing the rule of law to Australia for many, many years. But it is a great privilege to be asked to be present and to be asked to prepare the foreword. Mind you, because of the lockdown out here in Australia, I had no research assistants, no PA, no other assistance, and I had to just do it on my own. But sometimes we find in life that the things you have to do yourself, you do first of all more briefly, and secondly, sometimes with the input of the concentrated knowledge and things that are important. And that's what I endeavoured to do in my foreword. And I call attention just to a few extra points for the few minutes that are available for me. First of all, some would say, well, what is the use of the APPG going back over this past territory and adding new thoughts to this issue? Well, the evidence, the value of it, the first value is that it gives a very clear signal to the international community coming from this ancient parliament that North Korea is not forgotten. The crimes against humanity and the great wrongs of that country are not overlooked. They're not pushed into the background. They are still on the minds of civilized leaders in the United Kingdom and in many other countries because of the sheer horror of the circumstances in North Korea that were portrayed. So at the beginning and the end of my written foreword, I paid my respects to the APPG, to its members, to its secretariat, to you, Fiona Bruce, and you, David Alton, for your stalwart support for the people of North Korea, where people mute their voices. We know from our contact on a webinar, you don't get heard, but when you unleash your voices, then you can speak to the world. And hopefully, one hopes that the international media, which has many important centres in the United Kingdom and in London, will pick up the new report of the APPG and bring it to a wider notice. The second point is the change that has necessarily come about from President Trump's defeat in the American election and the election of President Biden. Now, some people were very opposed to Mr. Trump's intrusion into the North Korea issue, but my own view, in the light of the fact that so much needed to be done and so little really had been achieved, was that to try some new approaches, to try some new strategies, was definitely worth the effort. The problem was that President Trump didn't proceed in a way that is normal in diplomatic negotiations. He went straight to the hardest issue in the relations with North Korea, namely nuclear non-proliferation. It's usual in diplomacy to start at the outside of the circle and to find a few things which you can deal with, and then to move gradually and inexorably to the centre of the circle, which is the issues of universal human rights, crimes against humanity, possibly genocide, and the more complicated and difficult issues of nuclear weapons and missiles, which are themselves human rights challenges. But that wasn't the way Mr. Trump approached it, and the net result was that nothing really came out of his new approach. And on the contrary, to some extent, things were set back because he did not mention universal human rights or the report of the COI or the efforts of other bodies such as the APPG. And the consequence was that silence could be taken in some quarters in North Korea as consent or indifference to the issues which are raised in the COI report and in the latest report by the group. President Biden will bring with him tremendous experience. He's had 36 years in close engagement with international relations activities. And he will have no compunction in using those very clever people whom I got to know and met in the work on North Korea, who work in the State Department. So we've got a great brain power, which is not only the great brain power of the legislature of the United Kingdom, but the brain power of the State Department and of a president of the United States who's got a lot of experience and will perhaps approach things in a more orthodox strategy. I certainly hope so. The value of the APPG's latest report is that it raises new evidence and new information on new crimes against humanity and possibly genocide in DPRK. Now, there is a natural inclination of the human spirit where you haven't made as much progress as you had hoped to say, well, we don't want to go there because we're concentrating on the things we did. Well, that is not the approach of the group, and it's not my approach. Where great crimes are put forward on a basis of reasonable proof, then they are put forward for the world to consider. And you can't demand that the international community acts if they don't know. And I therefore congratulate the APPG for its work on, as Fiona Bruce has mentioned, new evidence of murders, public executions, new evidence of sexual slavery, new evidence of sexual crimes, new evidence on bonded labour, which was just coming to notice at the time of our inquiry, and fresh evidence on religious affiliation, which is something that we felt was needed and would one day be got. Well, the APPG has put it before the international community. And I was very glad to hear that the Special Rapporteur, Thomas Achia Quintana, also welcomed this new testimony to assist him in his task. I mentioned in my foreword the big change that has occurred in the administration in Seoul. There is no doubt that President Moon Jae-in has taken a very different approach to human rights in North Korea. And this has not always been favourable to or supportive of the COI and its report, or what has now emerged from the APPG. However, my hope would be that the all-party parliamentary group could use its experience as a body made up of people with different political backgrounds and affiliations as a lesson that could be shared with the administration in South Korea and with the Moon administration and with President Moon himself, so that he doesn't fall into the mistake of President Trump of mentioning everything else except fundamental universal human rights. And I hope that a bipartisan or multi-partisan approach to the issues which are above party politics will come out of the work of the COI and of the APPG. So I thank the group. I thank all of those who are supporting the group. I thank my colleagues who are here tonight to lend support. And I do hope that from this new report will come a new enthusiasm and commitment and new intelligence and brain power applied to the challenge to respond to the crimes against humanity and other wrongful acts of great seriousness that the COI tried to bring to the world's notice and is still before the international community. And it calls out for action, and the latest report by the APPG adds to the voice, and that can only be a good thing. And one day, the horrors of North Korea will be a footnote to human history. And when that happy day arrives, as it will arrive, then we can hold our heads up because we did not turn away. We did not look only to other issues, but we looked to this issue and we demanded that the promise of the international community, that crimes against humanity, genocide and other war crimes would not be neglected, but would be acted upon by the world community because they shock the conscience of mankind. So thank you for having me, and I will always come back to the APPG until there is action.
Thank you so much. And we'll hold you to that full offer. And thank you so much, Michael, as ever, for your wonderfully well-chosen and telling words. The benefit to us of lockdown as well has been that we have your unbridled judicial skill of insight and incision to show both in writing in your wonderful forward and today. So thank you so very much. Also, I say, I heard your praise to the report, and particularly to it would be to Dr. Evelina Ochab, who led the writing and research of the report, who we want to thank very much for her great work and great exceptional work. And indeed, she is very humble as well, and has agreed to just step aside, given timing, to hear further from her. She'll come in relation to the Q&A, but I want to thank on your behalf very much Evelina's wonderful work. And so now, because as always with APPG, we want to hear the voice of those who have bravely been able to escape from North Korea. Look, we now have a great privilege to hear from Ji-Hyun Park, who's a human rights activist, won in 2020 the Amnesty Brave Award, and indeed also an act of bravery, stood for election for Moorside Ward in the local government elections in May, which is a wonderful journey, isn't it, of democracy, seeing that happen as well in May. Ji-Hyun, over to you to speak to us now.
Thank you for this important report to publish today, and thanks for all the people who worked really hard. When I first came to England as a refugee, I first heard the words refugee, human rights, and women's rights. I received the refugee status, but did not hear about the Refugees Act and not hear about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights where I came from. The reason I became a human rights activist is because I saw someone else's pain for the first time. The loss of my parents and the trafficking in China, forced repatriations, and the pain in prison have always hurt me, and I had never shown my pain to people. One day when I lifted my head and looked to the side, I began to see people who were sicker than me. As one who found freedom, it was the duty of the free people to voice and fight for those who are still in the dark. North Korea, so menacing, so oppressive, so widely extremely in its rhetoric, so close to the world, and above all, so bizarre to most outsiders, has been the object of fascination and puzzlement. How can we understand such a strange, isolated state? Firstly, we have to know about North Korea's real history, how it became Kim Il-sung in the land. Second, Juche ideology and the 10 principles. It is totally different 10 commands. North Korea Juche ideology asserts that there are two types of life. The first is physical life, and the second, and more important, is political life. The latter of which crucial trait of life of one's free will according to the teaching of the supreme leader and the party. 10 principles of loyalty to Kim Il-sung, announced the 14th April 1974, and the 2013 changed the name. It is also loyalty to Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. 10 principles are the absolutely standard by which political prisoners are judged, transcending the constitution and the criminal law. It is all slavery system, and we have to know. Third, 성분 classification systems, how it is controlled to people inside North Korea. 성분 is a people's classification system according to their degree of loyalty to the DPRK regime. North Korea are subjected to various cases of discriminations according to their class, joint party, college admissions, job applications, promotion at work, and relocations. 성분 systems changed according to any punishment or commendations from the regime. I was born in Cheongjin City. My father was fed up with life because he joined the party, and I was a happy moment. But when I was a teenager, I knew my mother's 성분 systems. She was hostile class. The reasons my grandfather left North Korea in Korean War time. Firstly, we all hated my mother and worried about our futures. 성분 systems divided families, not to believe each other's hate, that's kind of racism to people. Started famine in early 1990s, many people hunger and starving. My uncle died of starvation in front of me, and I became my father illness and starving. First escaped to North Korea in 1998 because my father's last wish was save my younger brother. I abandoned my illness father alone and didn't say goodbye to my father. Once in China, I was human trafficking and sold to Chinese man and separated my younger brother. He repatriated to North Korea, still don't know his lives or died. Human trafficking is also another slavery system in China. And I birthed to my son, but he was a statelessness child. The reason that I was North Korean and I have not passport and the real ID card. So my son was too. 6 years after, I was repatriated to North Korea, but I couldn't say goodbye my 5-year-old son. Chinese authorities not allowed to meet my son. I sent to Chinese prison first, then 2-month prison, and sent back to North Korea. First stayed in Boibu, and they have 3 questions. First, do you meet South Koreans? Second, do you visit the church? Third one, do you journey to South Korea? If yes, one answer, you have to send to political prison. We already saw many cases in Boibu. I was economic cases to send to re-education camp called Jikgyolseok. I was forced labor in farmer side without the shoes, and we worked early morning and until the dark days. 40 females stayed 1 room without the windows, without the light. And every night, police put the 2 buckets inside. We are look like that is animals. Anytime they tortured, punished, and they not give to us any medicines, and not allowed to water. Females period times, they didn't wash their parts, and the blood came out their trousers, and the head lice, body lices everywhere. One day when I woke up and my leg was swollen and my temperature was 39, 40 degrees. Sometimes I was stable, and then yellow disgusting waters came out. My hair changed, my skin changed. I almost dead. Police guide shouted to me, "Get out in a camp, you died outside anyway," and they released me. 2 months after, I found a broker and myself human trafficking to China because my 5 years old son waited me in China. I didn't abandon again my family. That is, I survived in a prison. So 2005, I reunited my son, and we immediately to leave this China. So we went to the Shenyang, Qingdao, and Beijing, but our journey was failed. And then we crossed the border from China to Mongolia, but we unsuccessful our journeys. We stayed in Beijing 2 years, and then 2007, I met Korean American pastor, and he helped to us. And 2008, I arrived in the UK. We must not forget the painful history of the past because it's nowadays North Korean present life. I am still memorized, starving to death, my uncle, and my father couldn't even cross his eyes properly in front of me. The corpses lying on the street, the moment when the dead bodies left at stations, next doors, hell in China, human living hell in North Korea prison, stinging and rotting, not forgetting the terrible reality of flies and bugs coming off my food. How precious today is to me, and the happiness that someone else wanted to be able to not forget the pain that women had to run while dragging a hot pot. History remembered modern cultural revolutions, Cambodian Khmer Rouge regime, and Rwanda terrorism, while still forgetting the brutal totalitarian genocide of North Korea in the 21st century. We must not forget that the tragedy on the Korean Peninsula must not be repeated, and that the rescue of 25 million North Koreans is the way to protect the future happiness of the Korean people. Remembering North Koreans and liberating their slaves is the answer to collapse of the North Korean regime, and it is also a way to root out the only totalitarian dictatorship on the planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yehun Park, for reminding us of why we're all here and what we're doing and why we must not forget, and we won't forget. And it's a privilege to be with you and to be reminding us of the voice you're giving to others alongside you, and the bravery of those who can't escape as well, and for us to keep going. We now have just a short time to hear first question from Ji Seong Ho. You're very welcome, Assemblyman from South Korea, very much from Republic of Korea. Very welcome to hear from you, and I understand there's an interpreter who will be helping us with the question.
네, 존경하는 알톤 상원 의원님, 그리고 피오나 의원님과 APPG 멤버 의원님들께 진심으로 감사드립니다.
First, I want to express gratitude to Lord Elton, Fiona. Sorry. Sorry for inconvenience. First, I want to express my special gratitude to Lord Elton, Fiona Burr, Special Envoy, and everyone participating from APPG.
예, 그리고 그 박지현 선생님께도 감사드리고 또 이제 마이클 커비 이제 전 위원장님께도 이제 감사드립니다.
And also thank you to Ji-yeon Park and the prior
마이클 커비 위원장님.
Justice Copy. Yeah, thank you.
예, 이번 북한 인권 보고서 발간은 이제 UNCOI 보고서 후속 보고서가 된다는 점에서 매우 큰 의미가 있다고 봅니다.
The publication on human rights of APPG is significant in that it is a following report of the COI report.
예, 또 영국 정부가 북한 주민과 탈북민들을 도울 수 있는 계기가 되기를 희망합니다.
Also, I hope that this publication can be a foundation for United Kingdom to help out North Korean people and North Korean refugees.
예, 오늘 보고된 보고서에 영국의 다른 국가들과 협력하여 북한 이외의 국가에서 잔혹 행위의 생존자들에게 적절한 지원을 제공하고
As mentioned in the report, the United Kingdom can now provide proper aid to survivors of atrocities in DPRK and other states as well.
북한 생존자의 이익을 위해 심각한 국제인권법 위반으로 인한 동결 자산의 용도 변경을 위한 절차 마련을 해야 한다는 내용도 적극적으로 공감합니다.
Also, I want to point out the need of procedural facilitating repurposing frozen assets as a result of DPRK's civil violation on international human rights law. This will be able to support people from DPRK who had experienced human rights violations conducted by the state.
예, 저 또한 한국의 북한 인권법에 제3국에 체류 중인 탈북민을 대한민국 정부가 보호할 수 있도록 하는 법을 개정하였고
I also proposed an amendment to the North Korean Human Rights Act, which greatly extended the support North Korean defectors residing outside of North Korea can receive from the ROK government.
또한 이제 북한에 거주했던 탈북민이 북한 당국으로부터 받은 불법적인 인권 침해에 대한 배상을 받을 수 있는 북한의 인권 침해 피해 배상 특별법도 이제 제출하였습니다.
And I also introduced an act called the North Korean Human Rights Reparation Act, which allows DPRK defectors in South Korea to receive reparation for the not only illegal but also horrific human rights violations they experienced while still in DPRK.
예, 이 법은 한국 영역에 들어온 북한 자산을 압수하고 동결하여서 북한 당국으로부터 피해받은 탈북민들에게 배상할 수 있도록 하는 법입니다.
What this law is it confiscates the North Korean assets found in South Korea and freezes them in order to repurpose them as reparation to the surviving North Korean defectors residing in South Korea.
예, 전 세계적으로 이러한 조치들이 법으로 제정되기를 진심으로 바랍니다.
And I sincerely hope that similar legal measures be taken in countries all around the world.
예, 또한 북한 인권법도 영국, 호주 등 세계 각국 정부 또 의회에서 제정할 수 있도록 검토하고 적극 지지해 주기를 부탁드립니다.
And also we need to review the North Korean Human Rights Act so that countries all over the world like the UK and Australia can introduce similar acts in their own respective countries.
예, 북한 주민들의 인권 보호를 넘어 북한 당국이 앞으로도 자행할 인권 침해를 억제하는 역할도 하기에 국제사회가 이를 적극 나서주기를 희망합니다.
Our work not only protects the rights of North Korean citizens but also can have the effect of repressing the DPRK authorities from engaging in further human rights violations.
예, 감사합니다. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and so I pray that the international community take an active role in this matter, and I also sincerely appreciate all your work for the North Korean citizens and defectors. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, and thank you for joining us, Ji Seung Ho. And if I may just also, because we have run out of time, just ask perhaps if Mervyn Thomas could just, he's joined us as well, and want to thank Mervyn, not least as the founding president of CSW, who's provided Secretariat to come to the floor just to say a brief word or question, and then we can, then I'll bring in the panelists to conclude. Merv.
Thank you very much, David. Can you hear me? Can yes. People hear me? Yeah, good. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody concerned today, and particularly thank you to the APPG for this very timely report, and of course thank you to the Honourable Michael Kirby, who we campaigned for many years to get a commission of inquiry at CSW, because it was in 2007 that we rewrote the very first major report on human rights violations, North Korea, a case to answer and a call to act. And probably, David, that press piece that you put up there came out of that report. That was when these things started to happen. I've got two questions I would like to raise this morning, because this is an opportunity. This report is an opportunity for all of us to take your Commission of Inquiry report, Michael, off the shelf and blow off the dust, because even though none of us have let it gather dust, we know the international community has let it gather dust. And so this report today enables us to kickstart again and to raise the issues that are so powerfully put in the report. And of course, Yeon Park's, as you said, David, you know, this is what it's all about, hearing the authentic stories. The international community needs to stand up and, as you said, Michael, unmute and really speak up about this. I've got two very quick questions. Can we, bearing in mind the religious freedom aspect of this, Fiona, I wonder if this is something that the International Religious Freedom and Belief Alliance could get behind to raise awareness in those countries that are part of that. And secondly, you know, has the APPG got a media strategy for this? We need to get the media again, knowing that there is more to North Korea than nuclear disarmament. It's about there's a human rights aspect there, and so, you know, is there a media strategy? We certainly at CSW will be press releasing this report today and making as much noise as we can. Let's take the opportunity to stand up and unmute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And perhaps I'll just respond to Seonji's comments and challenges, as well as Merv Thomas's. Can we just, and perhaps some concluding comments as well? I have to keep you quite short, but Fiona, the challenge first came to you as not least the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief. To you first.
Well, thank you very much, David. And yes, whilst obviously I've chaired this inquiry report in my capacity as a parliamentarian, not actually in my capacity as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy, I hear what you say, Mervyn, and I will indeed consider highlighting this report to the alliance of, this is the alliance of 33 countries that I as envoy from the UK I'm a member of, 33 countries concerned with defending and promoting freedom of religion or belief around the world. So thank you for suggesting that. And can I also thank you, Mervyn, personally, and CSW more widely, including, of course, Ben Rogers, who in his time at CSW over very many years was so supportive of the all-party group and I'm sure contributed instrumentally to the 2007 report. And thank you, Margarita Hahn, for your support to us in this report as the Secretariat. So appreciate what you say. A media strategy, well, I'm very pleased to say that we do have a representative from the BBC World Service on this call today, and I am hopeful that we will indeed see more media. I'm encouraged that one of the calls that the All-Party Group made, of course, many years ago was to press for the BBC World Service to broadcast into North Korea, and we're delighted that that is happening, and hope that that broadcasting will increase. Of course, it would be wonderful if reference to this report could be made, but one day perhaps. In the meantime, yes, we very much want to see the report broadcast far and wide, and I encourage all on this call to do that. And then just finally, with regard to the previous questioner, thank you for all the points that you raised. The recommendations in the report, including, for example, that the UK should work with other states to provide North Korean survivors of atrocities with assistance in countries outside the DPRK, and that the UK should work on a process to implement the repurposing of frozen assets for the benefit of North Korean survivors of violations of human rights. And indeed, many other recommendations in the report do address the kind of concerns that you have raised. And I am confident that these recommendations will be looked at very, very carefully by officials within the UK Foreign Office. So thank you for highlighting those points to us today.
Let's bring in Michael now, just to perhaps comment on those questions and comments we had, and to make a concluding remark. Michael. So did you hear me, Michael? Just I wonder if you'll be able to make a concluding remark and comment on those questions you heard. You're just still on mute, I'm afraid.
I also referred in my foreword to the importance of media, of engaging with the media, and not to underestimate the ingenuity and ability of particularly young people in North Korea finding ways to get the knowledge of what is going into the international media. So I think getting a voice into North Korea is part of the solution. Getting a voice into China and getting the interest of China is part of the solution. Getting a voice into the new administration in the United States is part of the solution. And getting a voice into the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office in the United Kingdom is another part of the solution. The one thing that is not tolerable is to do nothing. And I think it's a good thing that the APPG has put its face against that option and continues to try to attract the attention of good people around the world. If they think and learn about North Korea, they will be horrified, and that will be the engine that will drive ultimate reform.
Thank you very much. Lord Orton.
Thank you very much, David. I first of all endorse what Mervyn was saying about the important role that CSW has played throughout, and that it's wonderful that Ben is on the call. Ben travelled with me to North Korea on one occasion, but the photograph I showed earlier on from that inquiry, the late Stuart Windsor is there in the corner, and representing CSW as he always faithfully did. So I'm a great believer in getting stuck in for the long term. I think the sight of popular causes that suddenly occupy people's interest for 2 minutes and then they move on to something else is not a very beguiling or attractive phenomenon. And I think it's more important for us to commit ourselves for the long term. And if you do, then you see change. I mean, as a young man, as a young MP, I travelled illegally into bits of the former Soviet Union. and got arrested on one occasion in the Ukraine. I doubted whether I would see change in my lifetime. I doubted whether I'd see apartheid fall in South Africa, though as a schoolboy I joined the anti-apartheid movement. I doubted that I would see a peace deal in Northern Ireland, and fragile as it sometimes is. These are all extraordinary examples of change that has taken place because people persevered over long periods of time and didn't just fall at the first fence. I agree so much with what Michael has just said about how we have to keep shining a light and making sure that people hear the message. This is about breaking the information blockade. That is one of the things the APPG committed itself to. And it is wonderful that Julia Harris is on the call today from the BBC, because Julia was so supportive when the Foreign Office was so opposed to BBC transmissions to the Korean Peninsula. And I can tell the story now, I couldn't then. But we met nothing but hostility because we were told it would upset the situation, it might jeopardize our embassy in Pyongyang, etc., etc. And in the end, the BBC took the right decision and have been performing a great service in broadcasting to the Korean Peninsula. It was long overdue, and Julia played an important part in that. But social media is also important here. And I asked yesterday if we could all be sent a link to today's hearing, but also to the report itself. And I know that if Michael, for instance, sends that link to senior officials in the State Department and in the Australian government, if we send it to our colleagues, if we get it out there in a snowball campaign, then more and more people will see it. So we don't just have to leave it to journalists and to others. We must do what we can. And in our legislatures, I want to see an early day motion in the House of Commons before the House rises on Thursday, drawing attention to this report. I want to see parliamentary questions in both our houses asking the government how they respond to this report. We only have 48 hours to do that before we go into the long grass of a recess. We won't be back here till September. So we can't wait. We have to do this now. I'm going to finish by saying one other thing. I would like to see a global petition demanding that the Security Council consider the Commission of Inquiry report and its call for a referral of crimes against humanity to the International Criminal Court, so that ordinary members of the public can affirm this as well and sign up to it. And let's make it worldwide and get as many signatures on it as possible. And I hope that with Mervyn on the call that he'll have taken note, because it'd be great if CSW perhaps helped to initiate that. It was a member of the British House of Commons who was a good Irishman, who sat for the constituency of Bristol, who said that all that's required for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And let me add women as well. And we've got some remarkable women on this call. So we aren't doing nothing. We are doing something, but we must do more.
Fantastic. And I know that any meeting that I've ever been to, Lord Orton, do nothing is never one that you end up doing at the end of a meeting. There's a long list of actions, and there's lists there. I appreciate we've gone into extra time, and I don't want to get into penalties, not least with the panelists here, but we just have Tai Yong-ho from the South Korean Parliament who just wants to say a few words before just a final comment from you and Dr. William Archab. So Tai Yong-ho, just to hear a few words from yourself. You're very welcome.
Hello, nice meeting you all. I see, nice meeting. It's Lord Elton. Can you hear me? Thank you very much for Fiona Bruce and David Burrows, and especially, I would like to extend my special thanks to Michael Kirby. I want to tell two things here. First of all, I want to tell the situation in South Korea. I think you have heard the continuous defense by President Moon Jae-in and South Korean government of, the Kim Jong-un. I think you have read the recent interview by Moon Jae-in, which was carried on Times, how he, defended Kim Jong-un in front of the world. And also in South Korea, it is very difficult for North Korean human rights activists, hold any conference or meetings to deliver about human rights, the situations of North Korea. So I think it is very important for the activities like this, by World, even especially by APPG, to continue to support the North Korean human rights activists movement, not only in South Korea, but worldwide, because your activities is one of the greatest hopes to the North Korean defectors group inside South Korea. The second thing which I want to mention about the situations inside North Korea, in the last several months, I can read the North Korea's media, Rodong Sinmun, and North Korean TVs, and there is a fundamental change is happening inside North Korea. The first of all, what I want to say is that the bridge between North Korean young generation and the North Korean establishments is getting weaker and weaker. Now, the Kim Jong-un regime is going to attack more and more seriously on young generations, changing of their mentalities, the culture and their way of speaking, way of their dressing, everything. So I think this is really important, because this is, the open, the battle between North Korean established, the system and young generation. And a second thing which I want to tell, happening inside North Korea is that now the North Korea's legal system is now moving from reformation, the way to criminal, the punishment. That is one of the recent biggest, the change. In the past, North Korean legal system emphasized on reformation, something like propaganda, education, or whatever. But in the past few months, they continue to make and produce laws, and as well as, continue to punish those people, especially young generation, who, violated these laws. So I think North Korea is, the ideological socialist, so-called socialist country. So if the legal system is changing from reformation to criminal, the punishments, that is really, the important, the change. That means that North Korea is reaching, to its corner and corner. So what those, video files, documentaries which I received from North Korea, of course, this is North Korea's propaganda, machine-made the films, but through these documentaries, we can see very clearly that the young generations in North Korea are not afraid anymore going out to streets with those, English letters T-shirts. They are not afraid anymore to change their hairstyles. They are not afraid anymore using South Korean dialects, and the words. And now North Korean young generations are not afraid of copying South Korean style of wedding, the ceremonies. So that is very important, because, now in North Korea, the so-called Pavlov's dog effect is not working anymore. Yes, we have to see these changes. So I think we have a hope. So if we continue to pressure and if we continue this kind of, human rights campaign against North Korea, one day I think we can make a fundamental change in North Korea. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tong-ho. Really appreciate that. It's a very valuable voice and encouragement to us all in partnership to bring that hope. And on that context, can we just now finally just hear from Yi-Hoon Park, just have a brief comment from yourself on what you've heard, and then we'll just finish off with Dr. Evelyn in the chat. Thank you. So Yi-Hoon, just to come off mute. So whilst, over to you, Ji-Hoon. Yeah. Can you hear us, Ji-Hoon?
Oh, yeah. It is my internet died.
Just have a brief comment just to...
Hello?
hello, just a concluding remark from yourself.
Yeah, sorry, my internet was died. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so in North Korea, they never allowed any religions inside North Korea. So before I mentioned that 10 principles, it is a loyalty to Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. Are you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So before I mentioned that is 10 principles, that is loyalty to Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. This is the North Korea side religions inside. So that's why North Korea, they not allowed any religions inside North Korea. So we repatriated to North Korea and the boy asked to us, do you visit the church? That is most important words to us. So, so North Korea, so, and also another conclusion, that is my opinions, is North Korea announced again is the All Those March in this year. Is Kim Jong-un announced that, but I think that this All Those March is totally different in 1990s, because in last 20 years, North Koreans totally changed. You know, the younger generations and the older generations we divided, but the younger generations they already affected, and they already got many freedom medias. And they already watched outside movies and dramas, so they love that is outside. So these are
I think unfortunately your internet's intermittent, so we may just have to now just can't hear so much. So unfortunately, it's coming in and out. So just so I want to thank you so much for your contribution and ongoing support and for the APPG. And just a final comment from Dr. Leon Olchabu. We want to thank very much for this report, for doing the bulk of the heavy lifting in the work, producing such a report that had accommodation, at least from Honourable Michael Kirby. So Evelina, over to you just to say a few final words and then I'll conclude.
Thank you very much, David. I will keep it very short. Apart from shedding light on new evidence of atrocities, the APPG inquiry produced tailored recommendations specifically for the UK. And over the next months, we'll be working to engage the government and make sure that all those recommendations are implemented. So this launch of the report is not the end of the inquiry, it's just the beginning of the next stage, engagement and implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. As a lawyer as well, providing succinct ending. And that is right. This isn't the end, and we certainly the Commission of Inquiry wasn't sought to be the end. We want to build and continue and provide that new light and life to those original recommendations and the recommendations within our report. So in conclusion, can I just thank all our eminent panelists for your wonderful contributions, particularly, of course, want to thank our Australian friend for joining with us and us benefiting from you being in lockdown and locking you into our proceedings here. But I will release you and thank you so much for your time and ongoing support and the offer that you gave us, which it's always dangerous to make an offer to people like Lord Alton and Fiona Bruce to say to come back, and they will certainly take you up on that offer, and we look forward to continued work. And what matters most is for the sake of the voices we heard from Ji-Hyun Park, we thank you so much for your voice, and indeed the voices we heard from the parliamentarians in South Korea to continue to provide the support, that hope for the future, for the wonderful people in North Korea who we're doing this for. And we thank everyone, all those who've been able to join us from near and afar, and we look forward to seeing some of you soon, indeed maybe even in person at the next All-Party Parliamentary Group meeting. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to CSW as well for their support today and in this report and for the APPG. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Have a good evening.